If you can't make it good, at least make it look good. Your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning. Most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. Success is a lousy teacher. It seduces smart people into thinking they can't lose. I really had a lot of dreams when I was a kid, and I think a great deal of that grew out of the fact that I had a chance to read a lot. If you give people tools, and they use their natural abilities and their curiosity, they will develop things in ways that will surprise you very much beyond what you might have expected. I agree with people like Richard Dawkins that mankind felt the need for creation myths. Before we really began to understand disease and the weather and things like that, we sought false explanations for them. Now science has filled in some of the realm, not all, that religion used to fill. In terms of doing things, I take a fairly scientific approach to why things happen and how they happen. I don't know if there's a God or not. As we look ahead into the next century, leaders will be those who empower others. DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. Measuring programming progress by lines of code is like measuring aircraft building progress by weight. Computers are great because when you're working with them you get immediate results that let you know if your program works. It's feedback you don't get from many other things. Our success has really been based on partnerships from the very beginning. The vision is really about empowering workers, giving them all the information about what's going on so they can do a lot more than they've done in the past. It's fine to celebrate success, but it is more important to heed the lessons of failure. Power comes not from knowledge kept but from knowledge shared. Well, Steve Jobs, I think it's more like we both had this rich neighbor named Xerox and I broke into his house to steal the TV set and found out that you had already stolen it. So it's an absolute lie that has killed thousands of kids. Because the mothers who heard that lie, many of them didn't have their kids take either pertussis or measles vaccine, and their children are dead today. And so the people who go and engage in those anti-vaccine efforts, they kill children. It's a very sad thing, because these vaccines are important. Some people may call me a nerd. I claim the label with pride. I believe that if you show people the problems and you show them the solutions, they will be moved to act. Technology is just a tool. In terms of getting the kids working together and motivating them, the teacher is the most important. If you can't make it good, at least make it look good. Like almost everyone who uses email, I receive a ton of spam every day. Much of it offers to help me get out of debt or get rich quick. It would be funny if it weren't so exciting. The cruel injustice is that even though the world's poor are doing essentially nothing to cause climate change, they're going to suffer the most from it. To sum up, we need to accomplish something gigantic we have never done before, much faster than we have ever done anything similar. The climate is like a bathtub that's slowly filling up with water. Even if we slow the flow of water to a trickle, the tub will eventually fill up and water will come spilling out onto the floor. That's the disaster we have to prevent. Setting a goal to only reduce our emissions, but not eliminate them, won't do it. Making things, cement, steel, plastic 31% plugging in, electricity 27%, growing things, plants, animals 19%, getting around, planes, trucks, cargo ships 16%, keeping warm and cool, heating, cooling, refrigeration 7%. There's no magic line between an application and an operating system that some bureaucrat in Washington should draw. It's like saying that as of 1932, cars didn't have radios in them, so they should never have radios in them. Well, I went for a ride but I didn't find my car. Whatever other resources you may have, you can always use your voice and your vote to effect change. I studied everything but never topped. But today the toppers of the best universities are my employees. The point is that when we focus on all three things at once, technology, policies, and markets, we can encourage innovation, spark new companies, and get new products into the market fast. Remember that we need to find solutions for all 5 activities that emissions come from: making things, plugging in, growing things, getting around, and keeping cool and warm. There are 2 numbers you need to know about climate change. The first is 51 billion. The other is 0. 51 billion is how many tons of greenhouse gases the world typically adds to the atmosphere every year. But I hope you'll spend more time and energy supporting whatever you're in favor of than opposing whatever you're against. In other words, by mid-century, climate change could be just as deadly as COVID-19, and by 2100 it could be 5 times as deadly. There's one last way we can cut down on emissions from the food we eat, by wasting less of it. In Europe, industrialized parts of Asia, and sub-Saharan Africa, more than 20% of food is simply thrown away, allowed to rot, or otherwise wasted. In the United States, it's 40%. That's bad for people who don't have enough to eat, bad for the economy, and bad for the climate. When wasted food rots, it produces enough methane to cause as much warming as 3.3 billion tons of carbon dioxide each year. If you want to understand the kind of damage that climate change will inflict, look at COVID-19 and then imagine spreading the pain out over a much longer period of time. It may sound old-fashioned, but letters and phone calls to your elected officials can have a real impact. The world uses more than 4 billion gallons every day. When you're using any product at that kind of volume, you can't simply stop overnight. Times with follow-up questions. Eventually it sank in. The world needs to provide more energy so the poorest can thrive, but we need to provide that energy without releasing any more greenhouse gases. Now the problem seemed even harder. It wasn't enough to deliver cheap, reliable energy for the poor. It also had to be clean. Business is a money game with few rules and a lot of risk. In this business, by the time you realize you are in trouble, it's too late to save yourself. Unless you're running scared all the time, you're gone. Unless we move fast toward zero, bad things, and probably many of them, will happen well within most people's lifetime, and very bad things will happen within a generation. In my view, investing in public libraries is an investment in the nation's future. Solar cells, for example, got almost 10 times cheaper between 2010 and 2020, and the price of a full solar system went down by 11% in 2019 alone. Most people overestimate what they can accomplish in a day, and overestimate what they can accomplish in a year. How many people will be killed by COVID-19 versus by climate change? But we can't solve a problem like climate change without an honest accounting of how much we need to do and what obstacles we need to overcome. It's the main thing I do in my life. I read and I chew glasses. That's my job. Since the beginning of the electric grid, utilities have placed most power plants close to America's rapidly growing cities, because it was relatively easy to use railroads and pipelines to ship fossil fuels from wherever they were extracted to the power plants where they'd be burned to make electricity. As a result, America's power grid relies on railroads and pipelines to move fuels over long distances to power plants, and then on transmission lines to move electricity over short distances to the cities that need it. That model doesn't work with solar and wind. You can't ship sunlight in a rail car to some power plant, it has to be converted to electricity on the spot. But most of America's sunlight supply is in the Southwest, and most of our wind is in the Great Plains, far from many major urban areas. Just think about how many landowners, utility companies, and local and state governments you'd need to bring together to build power lines that could move solar energy from the Southwest all the way to customers in New England. Merely picking the routes and establishing rights of way would be a massive undertaking. People tend to object when you want to run a big power line through the local park. What they found is that there's simply no way for the states to do it without enhancing the power grid. The model also showed that regional and national approaches to transmission, rather than leaving each state to its own devices, would allow every state to meet the emission reduction goals with 30% fewer renewables than they would need otherwise. In other words, we'll save money by building renewables in the best locations, building a unified national grid, and shipping zero-emissions electrons wherever they're needed.